Good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, fans of democracy, I hope. It makes us so happy to see so many of you have turned up here today on this wonderful, beautiful Saturday afternoon. I actually don't know if it is because I've been here for a while. But I do promise you that this is going to be an exceptional and educational afternoon of conversation. My name is Iris, and I will be your host for today's panel. Where do we draw the line? Which is a conversation. If you've read the ticket link, you'll know about reimagining Singapore's electoral system. Now, before we begin, I'd like to introduce Dr. James Gomez to the stage to give our opening address.
Oh, wow. Very full house. How are you today? Good? Ready for some reform? Yeah. Let's hear some noise. Don't be afraid to make that. Ready for reform? Yes, very good. Very good. Dr. Chee Sin Juan, Secretary General, Singapore Democratic Party, distinguished guests, SDP colleagues, fellow Singaporeans and friends, a very warm welcome to all of you. Allow me to first extend my gratitude to the SDP's Project Reform team, which made this gathering possible. As you know, the sad and sudden closure of the projector 4 days before this event had the organizing team scrambling to secure an alternative venue. I was especially impressed by the can-do spirit of all those involved, the volunteer team of more than 20 people, and the project managers Arifin and Katik to secure an alternative venue and press on. Can we have a warm round of applause for the SDP project team? I also want to welcome and thank our speakers this afternoon. Dr. Alvin Ong, a fellow political scientist, Leon Pereira, a former MP, Joe Teo, who's not an MP yet, Jeremy Tan, an independent candidate in the 2025 GE, and Ahmad Amsher, our moderator for today. Before the panel, we will also have Angela Un, who will present on overseas voting. The SDP's project reform calls for 6 key changes. 1, remove the elections department from the Prime Minister's office. 2, end gerrymandering. Reform the Electoral Boundaries Review Committee. Abolish the group representation constituency system. Ensure a minimum 3-week campaign period. Set a minimum 6-month gap between boundary changes and parliament dissolution. Review the Newspaper and Printings Act to allow independent media. These reforms seek to align Singapore's electoral process with international democratic standards and ensure genuine, free and fair elections. Singaporeans from all walks of life have been asking for these reforms for the last 15 to 20 years or even longer. We presently have an online petition calling for these 6 changes, and with nearly 6,000 people already signing up. We invite you to sign on if you haven't already done so, and please share the petition to your networks. Today's discussion is important because there's a need to articulate clearly what is wrong with our electoral system. We need this clarity to press for change. Hence, we look forward to our panel of speakers for this very clarity. To press for electoral reform, there is a need to reach out to people directly so that they can get behind the reform project. Hence, I'm happy to see so many of you here today. Additionally, this push for electoral reform needs to be rooted in principle and vision. One, on what should be and not on what is possible, or on something is better than nothing. However, electoral reform around the world often happens not because incumbent governments decide to listen to the opposition or reform activists, but because incumbents pay attention when political mobilization behind the reform initiative issue gathers momentum in society. When it starts to gather momentum and it reaches to a stage, then the incumbents decide whether or not to do something. In the Singapore case, we need to build this momentum behind electoral reform. So the message we send is clear. Either reform the electoral system or lose at the polls. To end, I want to say that when we commit ourselves to causes that will reshape our world or Singapore, we do so not knowing if we will see change in our lifetime. We do it simply because it should be done, and it is the right thing to do. Hence, I'm immensely grateful and privileged to have all of you here today. Change has and will come and will continue to happen because all of us work for it. So thanks for the love, the care, the practical support, the moral boosters, and the solidarity. Once again, I thank you all for being here and wish us all a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gomez, for his wonderful and rousing welcome address. Next, I'd like to welcome Angela to the stage, Angela Un, to talk about a very important and often overlooked issue, and that is of the overseas voter. What rights do they have? How do we guarantee their rights in our electoral system? So let's welcome Angela Un.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angela, and today I'll be talking about the challenges facing overseas Singaporeans. And I know that many of you are probably wondering, why is there a presentation at all on overseas Singaporeans? So I'm going to answer this question right off the bat. First, we need to know, how many overseas Singaporean voters are there? This information is not easily available. So I had to dig around the SingStat website, and I came up with an estimate of 180,000 overseas Singaporeans of voting age. And this 180,000 is the number that I'm going to be using for the rest of this presentation. Now, in GE 2025, how many overseas ballots do you think were actually counted? Bearing in mind that we have here 180,000 potential eligible voters, and also bearing in mind that voting is compulsory for Singaporeans. You would expect this figure to be quite large. But the truth is, only 9,329 overseas ballots were eventually counted. I think that whichever standard you use, this is a really dismal figure. And that's the reason why we're shining a spotlight today on overseas voters. So today we are going to be asking, what are the reasons for such a low participation rate from overseas Singaporean voters? And we're going to focus on two key areas. One, the registration process, of the process by which you register to be an overseas elector. And two, problems specifically regarding postal voting. So the first point. Now, for local Singaporeans like us, we only need to make sure that our names are on the Electoral register in order to be eligible to vote in the election. If you're an overseas Singaporean, however, you need to go an extra step. You need to register as an overseas elector. And then at that point, you need to choose whether you want to start to vote in person at an overseas polling station, or you want to choose to do postal voting. Now, again, with your 180,000 potential overseas voters, what do you think the figure is of Singaporeans who successfully registered as overseas electors? And I'm not going to leave you in suspense. Only 18,389 Singaporeans registered themselves. And that is the most basic, fundamental first step you need to do in order to vote. Out of this number, 8,000 plus chose to vote in person still at overseas polling stations, and 9,759 people chose to vote by post. Now, 18,389. Why did only 18,389 Singaporeans register? That's only about 10%, right, of potential overseas Singaporeans. I mean, could it be because, they're not interested in voting? Did they not care about Singapore, or, are they apathetic? And I think the answer, as we found out, is a resounding no. Overseas Singaporeans care deeply about voting. They want to vote. It is an emotional thing for them. But then they have to face a really huge hurdle, the residency requirement. Now, there's actually a very short list of criteria only to become an overseas elector. But there is one criteria that is particularly stringent, and that is this one. You must have resided in Singapore for at least 30 days in the past 3 years before the date of your application. Let's look at this a little deeper. Now, if you're a Singaporean living and working overseas, I think it's a good assumption that you will not be able to take leave for 30 days at one stretch, right? To come back to Singapore to fulfill this residency requirement. You're likely to need multiple trips back to Singapore. And along the way, you probably want to bring your family with you, and so, which means that the cost of airfare, accommodation, and so on will be really high. And that imposes a financial burden on overseas Singaporeans just so that they can meet an eligibility criteria for them to be able to vote in our election. Which is why, just this year alone, there have been 2 sort of open letters by overseas Singaporeans calling for the removal of this residency requirement. All right. One is by Singapore Unbound, a New York-based literary organization, of which I think one of our panelists, Bjorn Pereira, is now a member. And in fact, a couple of months before the GE, the Straits Times published a letter on the forum page from somebody who asked for the same, and ELD actually gave a formal reply to this letter, giving the reason for the residency requirement. But what ELD said was, there is a long-standing requirement to ensure that overseas voting is expanded only to Singaporeans who continue to maintain links. I think that, although we're not going to go into it now, there's a lot to unpack, and with the assumptions behind this particular statement. What does it mean to maintain links? Why is it that the ultimate criterion is being physically present in Singapore for a certain number of days? Now, moving on, we want to come to our second big concern, which is postal voting. Now, I have here a funnel graph, so let's go through the figures. The first figure is 9,146, and I say these are the numbers, these are the numbers of overseas electors that are eligible to vote by post. Now, those of you who have a very good mind for numbers might remember that in the previous slide, the number seemed to be 9,700 and something. So why is it that the number has suddenly dropped here? And the answer is really simple. In GE 2025, not all the constituencies were contested. So we can actually figure out from the numbers how many overseas electors live in Marine Parade, Braddell Heights, GRC. Sorry. Okay, so anyway, at this point, they've already been disenfranchised, not by the state. But from then, about 7,808 of them actually downloaded the ballots at all. We do not know why there's a drop off from the number that are eligible. But what is important is the next two numbers. 6,097 postal ballots were received by the deadline. However, only 3,363 of those ballots were accepted for counting. That's a rejection rate of 45%. What happened? And the reason, in order to maybe make sense of this high rejection rate, perhaps we should take a look at what overseas postal ballots actually look like. So what happens is that on the day after nomination day, overseas electors will log in and download a PDF that contains these two items that they have to print out themselves. One is the ballot paper, and the next is the return envelope. And for this return envelope, there's a series of instructions here. Follow along this dotted line. Use glue to paste, to make this an envelope. Then for your ballot paper, again, after you vote, you need to fold it in certain ways along certain dotted lines. Put it inside the envelope, pull down the flap and seal. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up all this is because I'm hoping that as I'm speaking, in your mind, you are starting to recognize that there are multiple possible points of failure that could happen here, right? The glue could come unstuck, the envelope could come apart, your ballots could fall out, and even before that, people could print wrongly. Instead of printing single-sided, they print double-sided. Some people put two ballot slips inside one envelope. All of these will cause ELD to have to reject your ballots. And then you come to this part at the back of the envelope, this box here, where you have to sign. And your signature in this box has to match a reference signature that you had submitted earlier to ELD when you registered as an overseas elector. Now, again, this is a point where some people forget which signature they use, they sign wrongly. But also, the first pass is that the machine actually scans your signature and tries to compare it with your reference signature in its database. If it determines that, no, I don't think it's a match, then yes, your ballot will still go to be adjudicated by ELD staff, where ELD staff will use a manual look at your, two signatures to determine whether or not they match. And while I have the utmost confidence in the integrity of ELD officials, I think we can see that at this point, it is human jacking. So this is your postal ballot. Now, after you've done it, all right, you have to post it out. And there's an instruction that says here, the return envelope must be postmarked by the eve of polling day in Singapore. Now, I have been informed that Gen Zs do not know what a postmark is, because that generation do not send letters. And that is really significant because Gen Zs may not actually understand the significance of a postmark. Now, a postmark, of course, the most important thing that it does is that it indicates the date that your envelope was mailed. In this actual example, you can see that there's a date there, July 7, 2025, is clearly printed. That tells you that this letter was mailed out on that day. And that is the crucial piece of information that ELD is looking for. However, some postmarks are not so clear. In fact, they're completely illegible. And that can easily happen in postal systems around the world. And some systems don't even print postmarks anymore. In my correspondence with ELD, I was told that one of the largest reasons for rejection of overseas postal votes was the illegible and missing postmarks. Okay, so that has significance for overseas voters because it means that in order for them to guarantee that their ballots were actually counted, they have to post them really early in the during the electoral campaign, which in Singapore is really short, 29 days, right? And that means that they will have to miss most of the campaigning period if they send it off in the early days in order to ensure that the physical ballot reaches Singapore before polling day. Because if they decide to send it later, then they have to rely on the fact that a postmark will be on their ballot envelope and ELD will be able to read it. So at this point, I really just want to bring in not just the numbers, but the human side of overseas senatorial voters. I want us to remember that our fellow Singaporeans are human beings and they care very, very deeply about voting. In fact, they say that if you are living and working as a Singaporean in a foreign country, being able to vote in your country's general election is what makes you feel truly Singaporean. That is why it's so important to them. And that's why they put in so much effort to go in and vote. So Singapore Unbound has collected stories from Singaporeans all around the world, right, on their voting experiences. And I found the stories very moving. You know, I leave at 11 in the morning, I leave at midnight. My last trip to Singapore was a 60-hour journey. I was denied voting because of the ticket glitch. Voting shouldn't be a luxury. And don't forget about me, because I have never visited you. So I will end my presentation, with this chart that hopefully can help you to see really visually, what the really sharp drop off in attrition rate. And the biggest drop off is from here, the potential number of 180,000 Singaporeans overseas, where they don't even make it. Most of them don't even make it to be registered as voters. And subsequently, whether or not they choose to vote via post or choose to vote in person, there's more of a drop-off rate along that. So I hope that in our subsequent conversation on electoral reform, we must remember the plight of our fellow overseas citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela, for that very important and very, very necessary public service announcement on overseas voting. SDP, we're always working towards a freer and fair democracy. And we hope that, overseas Singaporeans, and we're going to work, actually, we're not going to hope, we're going to work towards having, a better electoral system that will serve not just Singaporeans in Singapore, but also working hard for us overseas. Now, but meanwhile, maybe, don't book any holidays in 2030. And if you have any plans to go overseas in 2030, just don't until we figure it out. But now, for the main event. So I'd like to welcome all of our esteemed panelists and one moderator, not moderators, moderator to the stage to begin our conversation on where do we draw the line on our electoral boundaries. It's not just obviously going to just be the physical boundaries, right, of our GRCs. It's also going to be the boundaries of time, right? When do our elections get announced? Who can vote? At what age can people vote? So on and so forth. So there are a lot of lines in our electoral system, both physical and also political, right, that restrict, some may say restrict, and challenge our rights to free and fair democracy. So let's first welcome mononymously known as just Hamshar. And you can also find him on Instagram as @Moo. That's M with 3 O's _EOW. If you're interested, please follow him. I will summarize his very long and extensive bio as a modern day Renaissance man, a man of many talents who has been invited to give his opinion and, his thoughts on mainstream media quite a few times. So he has a lot of opinions and thoughts on many, many things that are important to us. Welcome, Amshar. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Alvin Ong to the stage. He is assistant professor at the Department of Political Science at NUS. His research interest is in democracy in East and Southeast Asia with a specific focus on the role of opposition parties. Very interesting. And his book, Opposing Power, Building Opposition Alliances in Electoral Autocracies, explains why opposition parties may or may not build opposition coalitions to contest against dominant parties. So very interesting. If you're interested, give it a read, look for it online. But yeah, welcome Dr. Ong. Next, let's welcome Joe Teo. Not that Joe Teo, the nice one. Okay. The nice one who teaches you about democracy through data. She's not the MP yet, but she will be soon. So we're going to have, kind of like a Spider-Man situation, the good and bad one. Hopefully in the future. You might have encountered her on TikTok or Instagram at Suchabohr, SUCHABOHR, where she breaks down in a data-driven way everything from electoral fairness to how much caffeine we have in our morning coffee. So if you're interested in that, give her a follow. Next, we have Leon Pereira, who identifies as simply a Singaporean who is interested in giving back to society. So just a Singaporean, but a very decorated one who has held many, many important positions in both political and civil society organizations. He is currently a board member of Home, is that right? As well as serving as an NCMP in the 2015 to 2020 Parliament. So welcome, Leon. And finally, we have Jeremy Tan. I think he needs no introduction. He's had a extremely rapid rise to prominence in Singaporean electoral politics in the last few months. And he is, I think, in the past 53 years, the best independent candidate to date. So welcome, Jeremy. And now I'll pass the stage on to Amshar and our 4 esteemed and learned panelists to begin the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iris. Okay, everyone give Iris a round of applause for those introductions. Okay, thank you to the panelists. Thank you to everyone here for coming. And as my panelists here have been introduced, I think it would be nice for us to get to know one another. Before this event, by us, I mean the audience, for this event, Arifin Shah told me, can you send the invite out to your friends? I don't want to see the usual crowd. That's what you say, right? Okay, now I need to test that. Who here was upset when projector closed down? Raise up your hand. Who here voted for PAP? Raise up your hand. Turns out we do have the usual crowd. Okay, it's all right. We can still make it an unusual, or, we can still take something away from it. Okay, so first of all, we'll have Dr. Alvin to present. But before that, I need some feedback from you at times, I think as Singaporeans in class, sometimes we just sit there and stone. But this isn't a classroom, okay? So I need some response, I need some interaction, non-verbal preferably. So shut up and sit down. So how can you respond? Well, everyone here have a handphone? Can I see your handphones, please? Lovely. Thanks for being so obedient. So at any point of time, if you don't understand, please turn on your light and flicker it. So let me speak in Malay. Sila turn on korang punya lampu telefon. Who here don't understand? Please turn on. Thank you very much. Okay. That was half Malay. Not very good at it. Okay. In any case, without holding y'all back anymore, without further ado, Dr. Alvin, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for taking time to be here. Thank you to the SDP for inviting me to be here. Before I begin, just one disclaimer. Everything I say today is my personal opinion. The opinions do not reflect that of my employer. So if there's any media people around here, please, I repeat, the comments and opinions like it do not reflect that of my employer. Okay? Okay. So, thank you for inviting me again. As the first speaker, I want to just share the context of electoral reform across different countries and from based on my research that I've done over the past few years. And I have to apologize in advance because it is going to be very depressing. Okay, it's going to be pessimistic and going to be very depressing. And there's a way to potentially set the tone, and hopefully the other three speakers will be able to hype up the potential electoral reform. But I'm just going to talk about the practical realities. And I have one main point that's supported by 4 points. I'm going to try to be as quick and sharp as possible. The main big point is any successful type of electoral reform is going to be very, 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 very incredibly difficult. It's going to be incredibly difficult. I'm going to give you 4 points why it's going to be incredibly difficult. The first point is history. The second point is audience. The third point is complexity. And the fourth point is be careful of what you wish. Okay? History, audience, complexity, and be careful of what you wish. So history. What's about history? By my count, this electoral reform method is the 4th time ever in Singapore's history there has been an electoral reform effort. The very first time there was an electoral reform effort was in 1972, when 6 opposition parties signed a memorandum to the Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, asking for 9 different kinds of electoral reform. Not like different from what is SDP is trying to do. So if you're going to be successful, you're going to be defying history. And if you want to be successful, you got to learn why the other 3 reforms failed. So that's number 1 in 1972. Number 2, I believe in the late 1990s, early 2000s, there was a report generated by Open Center. And I believe 10 years ago, Marua also tried to do some series of events trying to push for electoral reform that didn't have much traction. So you need to go against history to be successful. Number 2, audience. To do electoral reform, there are 2 kinds of audiences. There's elite audiences and there's mass audiences. Electoral reform is an institutional change. You need to pass laws to change. Who are the people passing laws in Singapore? Not the people sitting here. Okay? So you need to be able to convince the people in parliament to write laws, to change the laws, to change how the elections are being run. So you need to be able, simply put, you need to be able to convince the PAP politicians that it is in their own interest that electoral reform should be done. And for people who are elected by one rule and you're asking them to change the rule to be elected in by another rule, good luck. Okay. Number 2 is mass audiences. Now, mass audiences, I'm talking about the ordinary Singaporeans that you need to convince that electoral reform is important, should be prioritized, and should be supported. Now, based on my review of the public available survey data out there, most Singaporeans are pretty happy with our electoral system, even though there may be grudges here and there. So, from my sense of IPS post-election surveys, as well as the World Value Survey, Asian Barometer, I can pull out a couple of numbers. About, say, 56 to 70% of people say that there's no need to change the electoral system. About 60 to 70% of people again say the whole election system is free and fair to all political parties. About 90% of people say that I feel free to vote the way I want to. And if you ask people in the World Value Survey, about, say, 70% of people have a great deal of confidence or a lot of confidence in the current election system. So if the mass population has these opinions, right, how are you going to convince people that there's something really wrong and that you should put in effort to understand, to try to change it? Right? That's a difficult task. And not to forget, when you're talking about mass audiences, the person you really need to convince is the median voter. The median voter, the 50th percentile voter, is the pivotal voter, not your average voter. And who's your median voter in Singapore? Your median voter in Singapore is someone who's around 50 to 55 years old, may not necessarily speak English, probably doesn't have a university degree. So that median voter has to be convinced that electoral reform is important and needs to be prioritized. Again, good luck to anyone who's trying to do that convincing. Right. My third point, complexity. To convince that mass median voter that reform is important, you need to trace from the very start about why a reform, why the current system is problematic, any single aspect, to what should be done to correct the mistake, and what you will actually eventually get out of it. That whole, what we call the causal chain, or what is wrong, what to change, and what you're going to get out of it. Now, convincing people what is actually just wrong about the current electoral system is actually not as simple as we think it is. Most people don't necessarily probably understand things like malapportionment, the ratio of voters to MP. As long as they can vote, they go to the polling station, they can vote, their votes are counted. It's okay, what? Right? They probably don't understand things like the power of the vote, right? Especially to the median voter. So that causal change can be quite complex, and you need to be able to simplify to help people understand why the change that you advocate for is important and is going to produce some outcome that is going to be superior to your previous outcome. And then finally, be careful of what you wish for. So I've looked at various reforms across Asia, especially. Just last month, I was talking to some academics from South Korea. They had their electoral reform to make their system a little bit more proportional representation. And the professor was telling me, right, actually nobody in South Korea asked for election reform. The elites who got into power, they were the ones who thought that they should have election reform, and they made the system much more proportional to allow smaller parties to be represented in the parliament. Otherwise, you have just the conservatives and the liberals, and they're way too polarized, right? You allow smaller parties, that's good. But eventually, the smaller parties go into parliament, and then they got absorbed into the larger parties anyway. So the proportional representation electoral reform was kind of like didn't get what you wanted, which was a smaller party representation, right? So you may theoretically think that, oh, if I make this change, I'm going to get some superior outcome, but reality might work differently. So these are the 4 different kinds of challenges that anybody who wants to do electoral reform has to be very explicit and clear about. And I would say good luck. Sorry to be so depressing. Thank you.
Thank you for that address. To just orientate you to the format, so I'll get each of the panelists to share for however long they would like to, and after that we'll talk about it for a moment. Q&A is at the end. I won't tell you when. so that you don't ask for it. Okay. So you mentioned a lot of things, Dr. Alvin, and I feel free to chime in, any one of you. I think the one you said about complexity, could you bring up some of the terms again? And let's test the audience over here. Are they above the median? Okay, so could you bring up some terms? Everyone, your phone's out. Can I see if you understand or not?
Does anybody know what is malapportionment? Malapportionment. If you know, you put the light bulb on your phone on. If you don't know, then
If you know, now we try. If you know, you put on the. Okay. We got.
you know you put on
Okay. 7, 8
10%.
in a room of 200 plus. La hawla wala
Okay, malapportionment. So, Joe, you'll try to describe malapportionment later.
Yeah.
And then educate Eddie. Yeah.
Okay, another term? Let's try an easier one.
I think most people know gerrymandering is.
Show your lights. Those who know what gerrymandering is. According to Chan Chun Seng, he said he will leave it to the people to decide whether there's gerrymandering. So, is there gerrymandering? Okay, there's a lot of lights that say yes. Okay, very good. Okay, let's go with one more term.
Disproportionality. Do you know what a disproportionality is? Okay, quite good also. Just to clarify, disproportionality refers to the vote share versus the seat share that you actually get in parliament. So what we mentioned, some of you might know, is that, for example, if you get 65% of the votes, but they get 95% of the seats. So the disproportionality is 30%, right? So this is what I teach my students at NUS. So can anybody say what is inherently wrong with disproportionality? It's a wrong feeling, but how do you actually articulate clearly and substantively what is wrong about disproportionality? Anybody?
Panelists, feel free. Come on, Joe, just break the silence.
So you don't get proportional representation of the.
Yeah, so what's wrong about not having proportional representation?
It was just like a real.
Leon, you got something?
In NUS.
Lecture. Some voters votes count more than others. Some voters okay, maybe.
Not quite there.
Like Professor judging the answer.
Jeremy, you want to have a go?
E+.
It's having more backbenchers that you didn't want A. That's the simple answer.
Yes.
I think what Jeremy did there is a good way for, I think, all of us to trivialize politics in a way that is consumable. Because right now, as we have demonstrated through the audience, political reform is something that is complex. Even for the people that are interested in it, interest is not enough. Like one of the candidates in the past election says, passion does not build playgrounds. And surely it will not bring about reforms. So what then can we do? Dr. Alvin, can you enlighten us? What steps can we personally take to reduce this knowledge gap, per se?
I don't know. Go to NUS, take my class. But I guess a lot of public education has to be involved. And that's where people like Joe come in to educate people publicly through the appropriate channels to let people understand what may be necessary, inherently wrong about certain aspects of the electoral system.
I think also it's about having that stamina, right? I mean, it's been 4 months since election, you guys still here, you're not sian. And I mean that in like a very serious way. For example, like the NRIC saga, stuff like that, right? It was broken open by Berta over there. Then
the good.
I think just speaking very much to the like you talk about having less ignorance and whatnot. The attention span and how much the media gives the candidates cannot be wasted. So I think even as you are just not a candidate, you are a very responsible, interested Singaporean, you would want to create content that engages first, then the message later. Right now, Jonathan? Yeah. Yeah, so I think that part is actually a long marathon, and the evolution of policies or reforms must be captured in a way that is engaging lah. If we spend every second and every video complaining, I think the electorate will not want to hear. They will feel very disconnected and out of tune. And so even if you're not running the next election and you want to highlight issues, you must find a way for that to be entertaining. I think that's a huge part of it. You see what happened in America, and why their news why their election cycle is so captivating is because there are so many personalities, brands involved. There's stories, and it's probably the world's most most captivating election cycle of any kind. I think this is very important if you want people to get engaged. If not, at the next election, you'll just have the feedback that all the opposition crazy one. That's all.
Okay, I think Jeremy brought up a good point there. It's constant engagement of the masses because most people are only interested within the 9 days. And 9 days is not the time that is required for a marathon, isn't that right? So, Joe, what do you have to say about that? How do you engage people about politics?
I think there's a lot to be said about the political engagement in between GE cycles, and I'll be touching on that a little bit later about inequality in voting power, right? What that translates to very realistically as a citizen and as a voter is how much access you get to your MP, how much access you get to your town council resources. Your experiences throughout the entire 5 years in the key elections, and you're very tangibly affected by these, right? So I think that's how we can keep people engaged across electoral cycles, because their political power still matters even when they're not physically voting.
Right, even when they're not physically voting. Leon, you have anything to say with your interactions with people on the ground? Does it only hike up during election period, or are people constantly interested?
I think that has changed over time. My experience is that currently more people are engaged and more interested to talk about political subjects in between elections. Maybe 30 years ago or 20 years ago, it could have been very different. That's been fueled by social media to some extent, but that also has been fueled by increased political activism to some degree, and civil society activism, I say. But I think the key battleground, if we want to talk about something like making our electoral system fairer, it really has to be one conversation at a time, one person at a time. And that effort really has to take place among the broad mass of people, or not just political participants and activists and civil society groups, but even ordinary people who feel a certain way and can be bothered to speak out a little bit, try and convince other people that they know, in their relatives and family chat group, for example, in the school chat group, for example, just speak out a little bit, not in a hostile way, but in a way to convince other people. That's how it's going to be done.
Thank you for that. I think it's a more human approach and consistent human approach as to why it matters to you. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, Dr. Elvin, go back to you. I think you told us about 3 instances of failed reforms. Could you storytell a bit more? I think we're keen to know about it.
Okay. So the very first instance of attempt of the electoral reform is 1972 in April. If I'm not wrong, that was like one of the most competitive elections after independence, because in 1968 a lot of opposition parties boycotted the elections because they disagree with the PAP. So 1972, everybody jumped in. I actually have the memo which the 6 opposition parties sent to Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. So I managed to dig it out from the archives, National Archives 10 years ago, on microfilm. You know what's microfilm? Microfilm. So it is a photocopy, and it's from the guess who kept it? Who kept the copy of the memo? It's the British Embassy who kept the copy of the memo, because they were keeping tabs on the local Singapore election politics. And the microfilm that is in the National Archives is actually a copy of the actual archive in the British Archives. So our archive has a copy of the British archives on my cocaine. So anyone who wants to see a copy in 1972, the nine demands of the 6 opposition parties can also have a look. If I'm not wrong, a little bit similar. They asked for independent election commission. They asked for 30 days of electoral campaigning. They asked if you can't have an independent election commission, can we have United Nations election observers into Singapore? And if I'm not wrong, the parliamentary secretary of the Home Affairs Ministry replied at the time and said, "You go ahead lah. You go ahead and invite the United Nations lah." So that was their response. Then everything else is like cannot lah. I'm
Just no.
yeah. I'm not so sure about the Open Center effort. I think it was compiled into a book. But Leon, are you familiar with the Marwa effort about 10 years ago?
That was, I think, 2 papers.
2 or 3 papers, yeah, on town council, on election boundaries.
So as volunteer, I contributed to 2 of them. I think the one that I took part in was about the GRC system. I think the one about town councils, as you said, which I wasn't really involved in. There was one about color secrecy education. So that was in early 2010s.
So would you be able to say, like, what's the reception towards those papers? Like, why they didn't gain traction? What?
There was a little bit of mainstream media coverage on the GRC paper, as I recall, belatedly. I think like 2 weeks after it was published, there was an op-ed. If I'm not wrong, Julian Cole, I think, wrote an op-ed about the Lara paper. But essentially, it didn't percolate to the masses. There wasn't a mass discussion. It didn't touch a raw nerve, and there wasn't a public outrage or a public outcry. Lots of people getting riled up or putting comments on social media. Social media was not as developed as it is now in the backbone. So I would say it's more the political class, if you can call it that. People who are interested in politics, right? Which is maybe 10%, 30% of the population.
Yeah. So what we can get from that is the myth. There have been many efforts done in the past. And of course, these are efforts that we can learn from. And most recently, that effort, now we have social media. It's a lot more developed. I think a lot of us have more of a voice, myself as well. And it's something that never was here before. That being said, the population that voted for PAP, do they use social media? Anyways, moving on to the next speaker, let us have Jo Teo, who will share.
Thank you very much, Amsha. Today I'll be focusing on the elector to MP ratio, so this will be quite mathematical. Everybody please pull out your phones and open your calculator app.
Yes, your phones are very necessary today.
Okay, no, I'm just messing with you, but if you are not following anything, please turn on your flashlight. It will be quite mathematical, so bear with me. We're focusing on the elector to MP ratio, which essentially tells us how many voters are pegged to an MP in our electoral districts, whether it's SMCs or 4 or 5 MP GRCs. And why it should matter to us as voters is because the elector to MP ratio tells us about the power of our vote. So you can think about the analogy in a classroom, right? You want smaller class sizes because that means that each student is getting more attention. So same here, you want a smaller number of voters in MP because then as a voter, you're getting more of your MP's time and effort, more of your town council's resources, like I've mentioned before. This is so important that it is mentioned very explicitly in the EBRC white paper's terms of reference that they want to maintain the mean or average elector to MP ratio compared to previous cycles. But what I feel they're overlooking is the spread of this elector to MP ratio. So how different the values of our votes are. And that's what I have here for us to visualize today. This is the spread of our elector to MP ratios. All right, you can see this mean that I verified this 2025 cycle. That mean is 28,384. But you see the spread is very, very wide. We have the elector to MP ratios ranging from 22,000 all the way until 33,000. So it's like a 51% difference in the values of our votes. And that means that someone living in Bukit Panjang up here literally has a fraction of the voting power, a fraction of the access to their MP, a fraction of the access to their town council's resources compared to someone all the way here at Kebun Baru. Sorry, I cannot see the screen properly. And this is even worse in some other electoral cycles. So in 2020, for example, our range actually went all the way from 18,800 to 36,000. So that's a 100% disparity in your voting power, right? That's very dangerous and very unfair because the only fault of yours is just living in a different part of Singapore, correct? But other than the very tangible impacts these voting disparities has on you as a voter, I think there's also very profound implications for our democratic process. And let me show you why. So what I've plotted here, we're focusing on just the 4 and 5 MP GRCs. Okay, and our green dots are our 4 MP GRCs. Our yellow dots are our 5 MP GRCs. Okay, and what I have shaded in pink is what I call the ambiguous range. And any GRCs with elector numbers that fall within this range could realistically have 4 or 5 MPs and still fall within this 22 to 33,000 range. Right, so now the decision between 4 or 5 MPs is quite arbitrary and is not justified properly in the EBRC white paper. I don't know why these values here have 4 MPs and here we have 5. Right, and what's extra arbitrary is that when does this jump happen? Because these 2 points are very close to each other. These 2 districts only have a difference of 5,000 electors, but they have a full extra MP. So that's not very fair, right? And I want to ask you, do you guys have any guesses as to where this jump occurs? Which 4 MP GRC has the poorest vote value? Sengkang, correct. So we can ask, how come Sengkang doesn't have 5 MPs? We can guess why, right? But we can't say for sure. And
Someone shout out, what's the guess?
The goal is not to get Pogba today.
yeah, I cannot say for sure, but neither can the EBRC because this range is ambiguous. Okay, and anyone wants to guess which is the 5 MP GRC with the greatest vote value? Marine Parade Braddock Heights, correct. Yes. So this obviously begs the question if there's partisan bias or not, right? And I can't tell for sure, but the very fact that we have this ambiguous range here opens the possibility of human subjectivity being involved. It introduces susceptibility to partisan bias in the system, okay? Not necessarily there's bias there, but we're susceptible to it. And that in itself is a problem. So what I suggest is that we narrow this ambiguous range down into something that's essentially a line. Okay, so I can now say for sure, if my elector numbers fall on the left of the line, that district should have 4 MPs. If it falls on the right of the line, it should have 5 MPs. Very clear, right? So even if I had a partisan bias, I'm very pro-establishment, or I'm a raging Oppie dog, there's literally nothing I could do to implement my own personal or partisan agenda because the numbers have spoken for themselves, right? I've gotten rid of this ambiguous area. And how we can do this is by narrowing the range that I showed you earlier. Instead of allowing the values to range all the way from 22 to 33,000, we can narrow it down and only allow our elected MP ratios to vary from about 25,000 to 31,000 electors per MP. And then we will get a situation that looks like that. A lot more clear-cut. And if that is the case, we see that Sengkang should have gotten 5 MPs. Okay? So what this does by narrowing this range is ensuring that we have a more consistent vote value no matter where we live in Singapore. So this makes our participation in the electoral process a lot fairer. And not only that, we can also guarantee the consistency in our vote values across the different electoral cycles. And I didn't realize the gravity of this until I plotted the differences in our elected to MP ratios between the 2025 cycle and the 2020 cycle. Okay, and there were a lot of interesting examples that came up, and the most stark one was actually Potong Pasir, right? All the way up here, this really, really tall bar. Essentially, Potong Pasir went from having 18,000 electors and MP to almost 31,000 electors and MP. So you can literally be living in the same flat, not move an inch, and the value of your vote decreases by 61%. That's not fair. On top of that, it's not fair to your MP in Potong Pasir, right, who suddenly has to deal with a 60% increased workload while still receiving the same compensation. I'm sure the constituents would expect the same level of effort and attention to be spent on each one of them. It is not fair to people on both sides of the electoral system, whether it's the electors or the elected leaders. Yes, so the value that I've proposed, the range from 25,000 to 31,000, helps prevent such disparities from happening both across electoral cycles and across Singapore. More importantly, it strengthens the integrity of our electoral system the process of drawing out electoral boundaries, and hopefully it will help improve the trust from all sides in this electoral process. Yes. Thank you. I hope that made sense.
Jo told me before this that she might they might have performance anxiety. Did Jo do well? Yes. Okay, that's great. Okay, now I need to ask whether you understand or not. Okay, so this slide, if you understand, can you go achoo? Okay, if you don't understand, lights up, please. Again, achoo. Okay. There's a few people that don't understand. Jo, is there anything else that you can clarify? Okay, how about that end over there?
That end, so you see, these are the districts that actually experience an increase in their voting power between 2020 and 2025, and most of these are quite consistent. They're within like plus minus 10 or plus minus 20%. Only Potong Pasir, it was 60% change, and that's very stark. They went from one extreme to the other, even though you can be living in the same HDB flat the entire time.
So, what's the candidate for Mountbatten?
Good question.
Bidadari flat very expensive, but Mountbatten house more expensive. I actually think that the best alpha to understand the voting patterns and the way that the boundaries will be drawn, other than the people from the PAP and the EBRC, it will be PropNex, right? PropNex knows everybody's incomes and they know all the flats and all the housing. They'll, if you really want to, let's just say, join a party and contest somewhere, walk the ground, right? You make sure you know a property agent. They will give you all the information of who stay where, which black transaction. They'll pull out the data for SRI, right? And I think that's actually something that I'm actually doing because there are new BTOs around the area also, like Tanjore and so. I feel that, the whole purpose of having electoral reform, which I'll later cover, right? It's also, other than saying that what's fair and like what you did, right? Just throw across the plot, left or right, right? It's what's also important is economic representation, right? So, for example, there's 73,000, maybe more. This is 2023 numbers, platform workers, right? But they are scattered across Singapore. As a group of people, how do platform workers voice out or get more strength in their argument and more strength together? You cannot get, like, say, a creative freelancer to unionize with the Grab driver, right? But in essence, platform work is their economic representation, their contribution. So how do we get people, of a similar economic contribution to be represented fairly? I think this is one of the ways.
Yeah, not just geographical representation, but also socioeconomic representation based on your, occupation. Did you consider real estate? I mean, BTOs in your assessment?
No, not necessarily, but even across the electoral districts, there's obviously quite a lot of economic disparities. There's some districts that are wealthier than others, so I didn't directly consider it, but of course, indirectly, you can look at the disparities in voting power, and you can see it's quite stark across the two extremes of Kebun Baru, Bukit Panjang, but even everything in between. We shouldn't allow such a large variation to exist when there's a possibility to implement a more systematic limit.
Right. Dr. Lin, you anything?
Yeah, I just have two comments. If you go back to the slide on the variation across the different constituencies, yeah, this one, right? So the average number of voters per MP is set by the Prime Minister, who gives the terms of reference to the EBRC. But the range in which is considered, if I'm not wrong, is by convention. For the EBRC. If you look at the various EBRC reports into the past, they will say as is, if I'm wrong, is like as per past convention, is like the range is like 30% or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
30%.
And then when exactly started this convention to have like that 30% is like a big mystery. But in our WhatsApp group, as I was telling Joe, you could potentially see the start of this 30% variation in Malaysia, right? So Malaysia is the other country that has the most similar electoral system to Singapore, except that they only have SMCs, they have no GRCs. Now in Malaysia, in the very early years of independence, they specified a range between the rural and the urban constituencies. You're not supposed to have more than 15% deviation, if I'm not wrong. Then they slowly, over the various election cycles, they kind of started abolishing that 15% range. Then they say 30%, then it probably ignored everything, right? So we might potentially, maybe, I don't know, speculative, that have gotten that plus minus 30% range. Now, if so one change could be to ask the Prime Minister to specify this range, right? Instead of leaving up to EBRC to go by past convention, which you just mentioned. Then the final thing I would say is, okay, let's say we find that this is problematic, and we want to say do reform, right? And get mass support for reform. I also think it's very difficult. Again, in Malaysia, this malapportionment, this difference, right, between the smaller constituency and the largest constituency is about 10 times. The largest constituency, 300,000 voters, about Amaklu GRC. Smallest constituency, about 30,000 voters, right? And even there, it's difficult for Malaysians to understand what is malapportionment. And for them to like turn out onto the streets and say we are against malapportionment is like really incredibly difficult. And Malaysia is undergoing like redistricting right now, redrawing the boundaries right now, maybe in the next few years, but I think they're going to do for Sabah and Sarawak. And they're also the NGOs there are also struggling to try to convince people that you need to be aware of this. And so we may have some things to think about from the Asian experience.
I think this 30% variation, the range that they tolerate, and saying that this is something that has just conventionally been done for a very long time, it begs the question, why should we adhere to these past conventions rather than change and reform and refresh past conventions from time to time? It calls to mind another example, which is whether opposition parties can have a contingent in the National Day Parade. And I think Mr. J.B. Gerandam wrote in and asked about that many decades ago, and we got a reply that, if an opposition party has 15% of the seats, if I'm not wrong, then you can have a contingent. So why 15%, and why do we have to adhere to that convention? Who kind of arbitrarily decided that? And so, yes.
Yeah, correct. I think a lot of the processes in this system are quite opaque. So we don't know where this 30% come from. Of course, we can speculate that it might have been inherited from the British or inherited from Malaysia. That doesn't necessarily mean that we should accept that, especially because I've demonstrated a very concrete problem that can arise from such a large range, right? So hopefully having a little bit more of a concrete reasoning behind this can help push the reform forward. From the best of my knowledge, every time this is brought out, trying to narrow this range down to 10%, I think it's been suggested in Parliament, and that coincidentally is the value that I arrived at, has been talking about our Commonwealth neighbors and that global context. I don't think I've necessarily seen a more mathematical and rigorous breakdown such as this. Hopefully it opens up new avenues in public discourse. Yeah.
I hope so too. Jeremy, you want to say something?
Yeah, so who's from Marine Parade Braddock Heights here? Okay. Yeah.
The same as
Yeah, you're not even in Marine Parade. I'm saying good. Yeah. So so the thing about what I've noticed recently was that because I follow Marine Parade news on Telegram, it's very exciting. There's a lot of events all the time. No, really, like you can go and get a flying kite event for $3, and you get a kite and free bus transport, water and cookies, organized by the PA. What I've noticed nowadays after the election, is that they start to, I'm not sure when this was created, but they start to sequester which block of residents can attend these PA events. So I tried to register for a kite flying event with my relatives, And it turns out they tell me to go fly kite. They say cannot. Right? No, they really say, sorry, you do not belong, your postal code do not belong to this. But so you log in your SingPass and then you try to register for an event and then they say you cannot go to these events because this is for 4 blocks. I've seen it. I've seen events just catered for like 6 blocks. And I think that is a very, very good way for grassroots advisors to get feedback and develop relationships. And, speaking about, say, drawing lines also, it's also about the ability for the PA and the grassroots advisors to be able to on laser focus on few blocks and perhaps their issues using the PA, right? And that particular mechanism and that machinery is something that we need to consider alongside election reforms, right? I think, John, you're most familiar because you ran a town council before, right? So I think if you are in other GRCs or whatnot, maybe you can try to look for your local GRC PA event page. Try to sign up for some, and then you'll see what I mean. Yeah.
All right. So to sum it up, what Dr. Alvin said. Okay, who got lost halfway through as they were speaking just now? No honest people here? Okay, fine, no worries. But to TLDR, right, what it was is a lot of what the conventions are arbitrary. Basically, papers say like that law. But their point is, you can ask, how come like that? But it doesn't come to our minds to ask. So that is a step in the process, a step in the process of reform to ask, how come like that? So Leon, how come like that? It's your turn.
Actually, that's an excellent question. I'm wondering if I should save my remarks for later, but no, I'll just say it. Actually, when you, which I have done, right, as a professional politician. Okay. Engaging voters, especially middle ground voters, about this subject of political fairness. As an MP, as a politician, I found time and time again that many people who are not political activists, who are not so politically invested or involved, they take a certain attitude towards this question, which can be summed up in this way, politics is like that, ma. Politics is dirty, ma. If you are the government, you also will do like that, ma. And this is a widespread attitude. This is a widespread attitude. And perhaps all of us here would know people who would take that approach, Why should we care? Why is this really important? It's going to be the same anyway, whatever way you tweak it. So that's why I think it's so important that these conversations be had one person at a time, at the level of, people who are not necessarily activists or political party members of any kind, but just people who care about this issue, trying to persuade other people who don't care about this issue, right? I mean, if you think about the electoral maths, right? There are 40% vote opposition, 60% who vote PAT. And of course, I don't know what 40% and 60% think about electoral reform, about this question, but I have a sneaking suspicion we can suspect what the different groups may think, or would have the propensity to think. So if you think about it, each one of those 40% actually just persuade one person they know to change their perspective. Just imagine what is possible. But I think the challenge is that a lot of people, we Singaporeans, all of us, myself included, we're quite reticent. We are not so expressive. We are often afraid of confrontation. We're often afraid of bending people in the family chat group, in the relatives chat group, in the professional, the school alumni chat group. We will shy away from politics. But I think, that is something that can be addressed by your tone, by your choice of words, by the way you choose to engage. You need not be belligerent, like you see in the US and some places. It need not be hostile, need not be cancel culture. It can be persuasive, it can be respectful. We can agree to disagree, we can disagree respectfully, right? We can disagree about the issue while respecting the person. So I think, this thing really needs to be knocked on the head by thoughtful, ordinary citizens. They see taking some action in their own private spheres, and cumulatively that can add to a lot.
So I think this election, and maybe in Singapore's history, I think Mountbatten had the highest absenteeism rate, right? And a large part of it attributes to this thing where voters will be like, my area is like that one, it will always vote PAP. So why I
I'm okay, lor.
right? And then, but the question is, why is there a need to say something like that? Why is there a need for there to be this demarcation of my area always PAP one? It doesn't quite make sense, right? Because by and large, we're all Singaporeans. We face the same issues. We live out the same lives. So if we have this mentality created out of boundaries, then it is difficult, lah. I mean, so the highest absenteeism rate definitely affected me. Nothing to do with my candidate potential, right? Yeah. So, but this effect will carry on to the places that are we've named like your ministers, like you say Ang Mo Kio, don't bother like that, right? Or like Marsiling UT, right? So having this type of name drop effect, right, will definitely be very, very, very challenging, because by and large they name drop the place, but you don't know the place, the boundary, how has it been shifted, how has it been changed. Yeah.
Thank you for that. There's some perspective. A lot of us need to change the paradigms in the way we think, and then it will sort of cause a ripple effect on other people around us as well. Okay, Leon, would you like to share what you came here with?
Thanks so much. So yeah, I'll just share my remarks. So I think my fellow panelists have covered already a lot of ground. So I'll just try and just talk about a few things. One is really some areas that need reform, that need electoral reform. From my perspective, as someone who has practiced politics, who's been an MP, who's participated in running the town council, and so on. And then I want to also talk about something that Elvin touched on, which is, how do we create a constituency for electoral reform? How do we actually move the needle and increase the chances of this really coming about? And how do we persuade people that this is something that should be done even for Singapore? So the first thing I'll talk about is really how the system design in the election system actually is in favor of larger parties, or rather the largest party versus all other parties which are much smaller, as well as how the system design favors the incumbent. And I think for those of us who are here, probably you know a lot of this already, but I'll just hopefully it'll be interesting if I just share some observations. So the issue of gerrymandering, right? The issue of changes of boundary at the last minute. I think there was recently a response from someone who used to be with the PAP who said that, well, the opposition parties know that these changes will happen suddenly, right? You know this already. So then surely you should be walking the ground much more expensively, right? Rather than just focusing on your particular area, why don't you walk all the surrounding areas so that whichever way they gerrymander, you will have walked that. So the obvious response to that is that the opposition parties are smaller than the PAP. They have less resources, they have less volunteers. The PAP basically walks every single area of Singapore. Every square inch is covered by them. Even the opposition wards are covered by them because they have grassroots organizations. Their grassroots advisors are very entrenched with the residence committees, with the community centers, the citizens consultative committees, and other organizations that are active in the opposition-held seats, and of course in their own incumbent seats where they're there. So whichever way the line is drawn, every single part of that line on one side or the other would be walked by the ruling party. But for an opposition party, it's very difficult to walk expansively, because you need a lot more resources. And even if, let's say, you walk expansively, how do you know that the line will not be drawn in a very peculiar way with a very, very strange shape that juts out here or juts out there? And, even if you try to expand in concentric circles, you may not have figured out that the line will be drawn in that particular way, So I think that's the practical impediment with having boundaries change at the last minute, and then you just find out a month or two before the election. You have the opposition party would not have had the chance to walk the ground, and it's not an easy problem to solve, to address. The other thing I'll talk about, of course, I think is well known to all of you, is really the role of the grassroots advisors. So as we all know, the grassroots advisors are either the elected ruling party MPs, or they are people who are somehow associated, usually with the ruling party. Often they are the losing candidate in the opposition constituency. Sometimes they are people who are, in some way associated with the ruling party's party machinery on the ground, and they will be the grassroots advisors. So they get access to the resources in each constituency that come under the People's Association umbrella. So that refers to the residence committees, which are physical officers that come with networks, that come with resources. That means the community centers, which are very large, installations and buildings, some of them extremely large buildings. A lot of resources, a lot of activities going on all the time, like the Jeremys are kite flying, and painting, and many, many different things, right? And then you have other grassroots organizations too. So for the incumbent ruling party MP, or even the people associated with the ruling party in the opposition wards, when they get involved in these activities, it enables them to build up political capital, to build relationships with constituents, and that's so critical in Singapore, where retail politics is so important in determining electoral outcomes. But it also helps them to understand the concerns of the residents, right, in a very direct way. Going back to something I said earlier, Singaporeans are not so expressive, right? We are more reticent. So sometimes the best way or the only way, although you have to also exercise caution, I would say, a very good way to get feedback is by talking to people directly, face to face. And I think for the ruling party politicians, they're able to do that using all of these resources. But there's another fact that I think often escapes attention, which is that for the ruling party, they get access to physical spaces to hold events. So if, let's say, you are a ruling party, let's say you're the grassroots advisor, you're a losing candidate for the ruling party to the PAP, right, in opposition ward, you can still hold events with constituents in the spaces that have been gazetted as PA spaces, in the community center, around the RC, and so on and so forth. You have physical spaces. Now, if you're a losing candidate in an area where the opposition contested, right, and I've been in that position before. So I was a losing candidate in 2015 in East Coast GRC. Hopefully it wasn't because of me, but then it was a pretty bad loss, so maybe I contributed that, I don't know. But so after that, we tried to organize, and we did organize actually many, many activities, but it's very difficult to find the physical spaces to do that, right? To have an activity. And of course, some people may say, well, you can just try and just go ahead and use the void deck anyway, for the HDB flat, and just do your activity anyway. And sometimes that happens, but that will be taking place in a legal and regulatory gray zone, which is not ideal, and it doesn't make anyone feel very comfortable. There's no predictability to that, because the town council may just come along and say, the PAP town council may come along and say, no, you can't use that space. You maybe used it before, but now you can't use it, or different town councils may adopt a different rule about that. So I think that is one thing to consider when you think about the inequality in the system design of this. And another aspect, which again, a lot of people forget, and I raised this issue a couple of times in Parliament, which is that the grassroots advisor also gets translated into the role of politicians in schools, MOE schools, right, where you are interacting with students, and you can influence the thinking of students about politics. So if you look at events that are in schools, when you find politicians going into schools, I won't say there are no events that opposition politicians can engage with students. For example, in the pre-U seminar, I think sometimes they will invite opposition, but there are far fewer events. And the reason is very often PAP politicians go into schools and engage with our students, secondary school students, primary school students sometimes, in the capacity as grassroots advisor, right? So again, the way this position is communicated is the grassroots advisors are supposed to be non-political, but they happen to be the ruling party and the government, whereas an opposition MP, even an elected MP, would be deemed in this system design to be political. So therefore, if we let you go into school and engage with students, it's a bit of a question mark. So I mean, you can go back to the Hansard if you're interested and look at some of the exchanges I had about this question, right? The answer that comes back is just not very convincing. I mean, I think for our students, we should expose them to different political perspectives, right? I mean, if we want them to be critical thinkers, to be citizens, they should not be exposed only to one political party's perspective. They're opposed to multiple perspectives. So that's another area that is where the system design is lacking now. and I'll touch on another area, and then I'll just go into building a constituency for change. So the last area I'll touch on, it's not really an electoral reform area, but it's a cultural issue, but it's something that I think we do need to address. And civil society groups and citizens are in the best position to address this, and that's the fears about ballot secrecy. Again, fears about ballot secrecy. You all know what I'm referring to? I think you all know what I'm referring to, right? So when the extensive engagements I've done with people in the East Coast and Aljunied and other areas, and by the way, I was also part of a roving team that roved around different wards before 2015 elections. So I had the opportunity to engage with people in Marine Parade, in Jalan Besar, different areas. Some people express a fear that their vote can be traced and it will be held against them. There is some research that has been done. There's some empirical data out there. You can try to look it up to try to pinpoint and quantify what is the extent of this. I think Professor Ong, you did cite a survey, a piece of survey data that said that 90% of Singaporeans feel that they are free to cast a vote whichever way they want. But so 10% feel that they are not. Under that, 10% is pretty significant. If you look at the winning or losing a margin, in many elections, that is less than 10%. So I think we need to knock this issue on the head. I brought it up in Parliament a couple of times, and sometimes the response that came back was something along the lines of, Mr. Pereira is trying to suggest that the vote is not secret. No, of course not. The vote is completely secret. It's absolutely secret. I have no doubt about that. And in fact, I think some parties do try to educate the voters, and some civil society groups do try to educate the voters. Marwa produced a very good video about this, where he had celebrities and influencers talking about how they know that the vote is secret. So, but so in Parliament I proposed that they teach why your ballot is secret. Show school students how the process ensures that your ballot is secret, right? So the reply that came back is, no, we don't really need to do this because we don't have curriculum time. There are other things we need to teach in the curriculum. Our curriculum is too crowded. So I think that's so that's something. And the problem with political parties trying to address this issue is that I guess some parties sometimes feel afraid that the more they talk about it, the more they fan the fear. The more you refer to this, the more people will actually start to become afraid. So actually, for ordinary citizens, this is really another thing that we can play a role. In our chat groups and the friends we know and so on and so forth.
All right. Thank you for that.
Can I still say something? Well,
One sentence. You gotta move on. Again?
Sir?
We gotta move on.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Leon. Covered town councils and opposition shenanigans. There you go. You can hold that thought first.
Speaker of Parliament here.
What?
Speaker of Parliament.
No. Anyways, okay, Jeremy's been, as you can see, he's been itching to say something on a mic. But first, before that, can you answer the question? Leon mentioned earlier about opposition walking the ground. Jeremy, how much did you walk? One person. How much did you walk?
Yeah, I saw some of my volunteers here. So I actually, because the HDBs were going to be my swing voters, I think I covered nearly 25% of the estate by myself, 9 hours per day. Nothing compared to Dr. Chi. Dr. Chi can walk 140 km. This guy is another thing. And the irony is that he drive from lunch to here, we walk here instead. So, yeah. Speaking about say, why do we do all this, right? Why do we want to come on a Saturday to go and spend 2-3 hours of our time? We so free, man. I will come here and make noise, complain or what? I think we make these arguments so that everybody's lives are easier to run. You want to expect the highest quality candidates, right? And no, not from the PAP, but they really do have also very high quality MPs, and they always show, right? And that is, but to get there and consistently have that level of expectation, it's like when you buy something, right? You see the reviews, right? The store owner needs to get your review stuff, right? And that review process is this long. It is why we do all this is because we want to make sure that everybody don't have to spend so much time on a Saturday and worrying about these things, right? It is about contributing. It is about thinking, how do you expect the best candidates, right? And even I probably have to share also, like, last month was durian season, right? So I went for the Marine Parade I went for the Marine Parade durian. They call it Fruits Festival, right? $8 free flow durian. Got longan, got lychee, got then still got competition also. Yeah, then I even my table won one durian, right? Yeah, and it's because my number was better than Go Pei-Ning's number. Yeah, so then I went over to Mountbatten durian event, and that was $30. So I'm just like, wait. How come one cc $8 and then one cc $30? Got real difference, man. Turns out no difference. Same supplier, more Wang, all the good stuff, right? But the question is, why is this so? Isn't this all paid for by taxpayers anyway, right? Why is there a disparity at all? Right? Maybe better people can pay, so their ticket is $30, or then Marine Parade is $8. Right. So I think that the focus on eliminating all these arbitrary things is so that each candidate cannot hide behind these apparatus in securing your votes easily and going to parliament to either sleep or chat GPT. Come on. Right. I think that's the whole the September parliamentary sitting, right? I want to see who is going to be chat GPT master, right? So yeah, I think it's very important because, like, if not every 5 years, the table is reset again, and then we all have to redo everything, finding people, get tired of this election cycle. And that's not the way Singapore should be, right? It should not be so tiring, so complex, and so infuriating to run for election. And by that process, the incumbent always gets to structure resistance to be away from them. And I don't think that's the way elections should be, right? And just now I shared with him about, do we want to do proportional representation or not? I don't think we conclusively said we want it, right? But in Singapore is so small, and most of the ground stuff is done by the grassroots advisors, right? I mean the PA and whatnot, and the grassroots. The question is then, why do we even draw boundaries like that anymore, right? And I think we've forgotten that maybe because Singapore has become so developed and life has been so good that we stopped thinking about getting MPs to challenge, right, the status quo. I give an example. Okay, Singho happened at a gerrymandered road. Okay, so it does it. If under the old boundaries, it'll be entirely Mountbatten's side, right? But so the response was for the MPs of both sides to come out and say, relax, we got this hole will be patched up, which to me doesn't make sense. You elect MPs to ask the PUB and, the BCA and LTA what happened here. You don't elect MPs to tell you, hey, yeah, actually no problem, right? And then also, like, none of us are engineers. How come MPs telling us this one no problem, right? And then turns out later they say, okay, the investigation will take a few months, right? So that is the purpose of an MP. I think because life has become so easy over the years that you forget that MPs are supposed to demand accountability from each agency, not tell you otherwise, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's the purpose of what we're doing here. And if we continue this path, then I think life is just going to get harder. I mean, life is really very hard, really, right? Nationally, already they talk about traineeships, and you got all these business liquidations, business leveraging up, Grab payday loans are on up, F&B closures, all these things are on the up, right? But if we do not start from a first principles basis, which is how to expect the best candidate quality from forums like that, then they will be lazy on those things, and then they'll just go chase the rainbow.
Thank you for that, Jeremy. Yeah, it's something that I think should shift our perspective on the accountability of these organizations. Okay, wait. Joe, you had something to say about what Leon said earlier?
Yeah, so I agree with what you said, Leon, about how the changing electoral boundaries disproportionately affects opposition parties because of differences in resources. For GE 2025, I think only 9 out of 33 districts were unchanged. So out of the 24 changed districts, really best case scenario is that the lines are shifted a little bit. Worst case scenario is that the lines are dissolved completely, which is even worse, right? You're starting on a back foot. There's so much more you have to start once they announce these new boundaries. And I don't think we really realize the magnitude of this issue. 24 out of 33 electoral districts are changed this cycle. And we don't know how many will be changed in 2030. So even the effort that we invest in these next 5 years, we don't know if they're going to pay off or not.
Right. On that effect, right, Leon, could you elaborate on creating a constituency on electoral reform?
Yeah, so I think this is really the big question, right? This is really the kicker. I mean, we all know that the system could be made fairer, but how do we persuade fellow Singaporeans? How do we actually bring this about? Electoral reform is very difficult to bring about, right? Like in the UK, there are always conversations about electoral reform. I think there was this thing called Charter 88 in the UK, but the system never gets reformed because the parties that are in power, at the end of the day, the parties represented in parliament want to kind of keep themselves in parliament, and they don't necessarily want other parties who are not in parliament to come in. So the electoral reform doesn't really happen. And I just wanted to address some objections to electoral reform and just talk about some reasons for electoral reform. So one objection is that we don't want the parliament to be more representative. We don't want more opposition in parliament because it will lead to unstable, polarized politics, right? So you will hear this, right? It's a common.
Do you all agree? That's not resounding enough. Do you all agree? Boo. Okay, anyways, carry on.
So this has become a popular refrain used by certain people. Say, oh, look at Trump, look at Brexit, right? So we don't want that, we don't want. So it's okay to have 40% of people vote for the opposition, and that translates into 12% of seats because that is a more stable kind of politics. But, actually it's not. If you think about Singapore in the longer term, that could lead to instability. If 40% of people persistently feel underrepresented, I mean, there could be frustration building up with that 40%. There could be unhappiness. And if they feel that they vote and their vote can't be translated to an outcome, those people could resort to anti-systemic politics. What do I mean by anti-systemic politics? You look at some of the parties that are emerging in Europe or even in the US, the ADL or ADF in Germany, for example, the brothers in Italy. These are somewhat anti-systemic parties, who actually are trying to bring about radical change. Is not necessarily radical in a good way, but could be radical in a bad way. Or you could get parties who just want to overturn the entire system or things like that. So I think there is an argument for stability to say that, a more representative system will lead to more stable politics, right? There is another objection that came out recently, I believe, when the PSP moves the EBRC full motion. So, Mr. Leong, I'm looking at you. Someone else also said that, but I'm saying it now, right now, so I'm looking at you. I think one of the responses in Parliament was that, if people are so unhappy about gerrymandering, they can vote against the PAP to register their protest, right? I mean, there is a natural mechanism to correct that. But actually, that is just nonsensical, right? That is just absolutely nonsensical. No electoral outcome is based on one single issue. People go into an election and vote based on many issues. Like, for example, cost of living, or, they would also vote based on who is the candidate that is standing there, right? So if you're a candidate you really don't like, you won't vote for them. A candidate like Jeremy that you really like, like I really like, you vote for him. So it doesn't mean that the vote is, it gives the people a way to register their protests about gerrymandering. A referendum would do it, an opinion poll may do it, but a vote doesn't do it. So just to wrap up, I think that there are many good reasons why you can try to persuade fellow Singaporeans that this is a better deal for Singapore. Healthy competition produces better outcomes. I mean, all of us understand this in business and industry, in the private sector, right? That's why we have competition laws, not only in Singapore, but anywhere in the world. That's why we have a competition commission, because you recognize that there's one large company that is bullying everyone in the ecosystem and telling the retailers and distributors that, if you carry my competitor's product, I will penalize you. Everyone recognizes that's not good because that produces worse outcomes for the consumer. So in the political realm, it's the same. we Singaporeans are supposed to be pragmatists, right? We're supposed to be pragmatic. So electoral reform, is a pragmatic thing. There's a pragmatic case grade. You get better outcomes. It's not just a fairness thing, but it's also an outcome thing, and it produces, a more stable outcome, and it produces more stable politics in the longer term. So yeah, I think you agree with that.
All right, thank you very much for that, Leon. Can we get a round of applause for the panelists? Okay, now we'll move on to Q&A. I think some of you have been itching to ask. And the first one I'll give the honor to is the goat of journalism in Singapore, Bertha Hansen.
The first question is for my purpose.
Okay. I didn't raise my hand, by the way. Oh, okay. Oh, no. Actually, there were a few points I wanted to ask. I think Ron answered my last point. When Alvin was talking about superior outcomes that relate to business superior outcomes, I wonder why you are not saying that we could be arguing for the case of the fairest methods rather than the superior outcome. So I suppose, being pragmatic, we will go for superior outcomes rather than arguing on the fairest ways. Okay, fine. The second point about is Josephine and Joe, right? Joe, okay.
The full year has been yours.
Remember Joe, the other point is about this not malapportionment. Right? So when you talked about I also listened to Alvin, you talked about the standard deviation. I wanted to make a point that in this last particular GE year, there was no mention of it at all compared to past EBRCU thoughts. There's actually no mention of it at all. That's actually, to me, is even more of a wonder. Whether or not it's based on convention or history or whatever. We must at least be told what is the deviation, right? And in fact, I think a better structure would be to ask for the deviation to be standardized with international dogs. International dogs is about between 10 to 50, not our gigantic 30. So we are way out of line. And I don't think any politician worth his salt or any citizen can argue that this is not way out of line. It is so clear, So that's one thing. Now third thing is about, you see, when you talk about gerrymandering, how districts are carved, there's a certain assumption there that that how you are drawing the boundaries is to your benefit. Now, the only way you know how the boundaries are to your benefit is if you know the polling results. If you have all the polling results, then you will see, these people hate me, these people like me, and then I know I can push you there, I push you here, I think, you can do that, okay? Now, they've already said the EBRC is professional, so I can't argue. I don't want to say anything, okay? Now, so the thing is, we do have polling results. Both the PAP and opposition candidates have an idea of how each polling district does. I mean, if you're worth anything at all, you should be collecting all your numbers and you know which block hates you, which block likes you. Now, so basically, I've been asking this question for a long time. Why the results of subdivisions, I'm not even calling for polling district. In fact, now when Jerry was talking about the block level, the one reason is because our polling districts are not so small and so many. You can actually tell within a 10 block radius whether this is a pro whatever estate. So the thing is, we do have polling results. The opposition parties, I know you're signing on disclosure. Counting agents can sign them. I think politicians have to sign them, so you can't tell people. I do not see when this should apply post-polling. If the opposition parties are going to come out and say, this is how we did in this estate, and this is how we fared in the different divisions, I applaud you. And I don't think the PP is going to say, I'm sorry, you go to jail. I mean, essentially, this is, in my view, no different from the days when there were SMCs. It was the same thing. We have a more defined idea of how each person who's supposed to look after the area did. And with that, I think then we can actually say whether got gerrymandering or not. Because right now it's simply as if on everything. And we just know it's the car and somehow it's going to take a benefit someone else. All right. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
All right. Thank you for your line, sir. I'll give it to Jeremy sir. We also have another big personality, one of the top podcasters in Singapore, Prof. Khalid over there. He also wants to answer against my will. But Jeremy first.
No, I'll just very quickly talk about the last part about the polling district being so many and so small, right? I actually, the Psephology Society, the people that collect the voting results by divisions, they created the infographic for me after I submitted my data to them. And then I posted it on Instagram. And then two of my friends who are lawyers said, hey, you better check the ELD whether or not you can post this. So I faster take down. So then I sent the email to ELD asking if I can post this. They no response. But what they did is, hey, we audit your expenses. But to that point, I'm still awaiting the response from ELD to see whether I can post the district level breakdown, the heat mapping. Yeah, because I think it's very important. Yeah, like if everybody the data you should share. I feel like that's.
When you get your hands on it, please share it with me.
Just one small additional point, right? With regards to thinking about electoral second change, about whether are we going towards are we thinking about way towards a fairer system or towards a more superior outcome system? So I know the idealists amongst us and my principles and whatnot, I can totally understand the idea that we should go for a more fairer system, right? But here's the kicker, right? So if we're taking the devil's advocate position here, if I'm the PAP, I'll say my responsibility is to design a system, to have a system that produces the best government for them. And the most stronger, stable government that can help govern Singapore's lives, Singaporeans' lives, the best it can be. And I believe my system is the best. And how are you going to argue against that? That's the problem, right? And that's the anyone who is proposing a electoral reform, they got to be precise about whether the change that they are making is going to produce superior outcomes, right? To what the PAB has produced. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That might beg the question then, how will you find out superior outcomes if you never try it?
Yeah. So it's all a definition.
Right. Okay, on to the next question. The mic's already there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the panel. I have a couple of questions. The first one is, do you think, say there are two politicians, okay, one in the heart and two north politicians, do you think that it's better for the opposition parties to not be the one to lead the charge for electoral reform? Because it would just seem as, the opposition is going to oppose any. So that's the first one, the tactical thing. The second is for my friend Yon. And you mentioned that the elections do not show the... I agree, it's a silly... You are referring to Joshua, right? He said that voters can vote against gerrymandering. It's a silly argument. But don't you think the results of the election has shown at least that voters are not disgusted with gerrymandering to the point that they would vote based on? Thank you.
Thank you, my friend Lalit, for those questions. So maybe I'll take the second one first. I think that it's hard to infer, I would say, from the result. I think in this last election, there were other concerns that maybe outweigh that concern, like concern about Trump tariffs, right? So I think people were worried that you needed to have a strong government to be in a position to negotiate with Trump, and I think things along those lines, that was played out or that had its effect. I wouldn't say that necessarily means that people don't think that electoral reform is an important issue. It's an insignificant issue. It doesn't really mean that they agree that the system is perfect and it cannot be improved in any way. And, just sort of correlated to that point, we had a very exhaustive Forward Singapore exercise, right? Where there was a lot of opinion surveying, there was a lot of focus group discussions. And somehow or other in the Fall Singapore report, there was no mention of the electoral reform. I can't recall the details of this. Maybe while you recall, but I think there was a question put forward. Did this come up? Did the political reform, electoral reform come up? I mean, stand corrected. As I recall, the reply that came back was that not every single issue can put into the report because we have to focus on things that are practical and actionable. So I don't know if it's ever been put to the test. How Singaporeans feel, how strongly they feel about this issue of the electoral reform. So I wouldn't say we can infer it straightforwardly. Sorry, what was the first question here?
Opposition parties is
Okay, that is a great point. I would say that you may have a point. It is similar to what I said about the ballot secrecy education, and I certainly found that sometimes when I try to have conversations about ballot secrecy, one or two people would respond to me by saying, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Because it's in your interest to say that. So sometimes, an independent group coming forward to say a ballot is secret. And I think, electoral reform maybe that is also the case because sometimes, the PAP will rebut such calls and say that, well, that's just in your interest or you are being for interest. So there is some role here, I suppose, for independent groups and even individual citizens, I would say, to really lead the charge or a prominent etc. But of course, that doesn't mean that political parties can't weigh in. And I think that political parties should raise the issues in Parliament in particular, which I think PSP did with the EBRC motion, right? Because, such issues should be debated in Parliament so that we can hear what the PAP's response is and, you can have a reasoned debate that is televised, that is recorded, and people can look at that debate and make up their own mind in Parliament. So I think that there is a role for that as well.
Yeah, maybe I'll just answer the question. I think, Walid, if you read my 2018 paper, Singapore, Malaysia, and Cambodia. So let me just talk a little bit about the comparative landscape between Malaysia and Cambodia, right? So in Malaysia, you have a very clear case of civil society leading the charge. At first, per se was formed by opposition parties, but then they evolved it into a pure civil society movement, right? And the pure civil society movement, you really need very strong connections with the ordinary people. And of course, the opposition parties do support the civil society efforts, right? But Bersay was purely civil society fronted. And what you got was much more technocratic reforms. And what I mean by technocratic reforms? Technocratic reforms meaning, for example, in Malaysia, there's a very strong problem about we don't know who actually voted or not. And so they have a indelible ink, right? So when Malaysians vote, you can see they dip their fingers into the ink, and then everybody can show that they have voted already, right? There's phantom voters and foreign voters and so on and so forth, right? So those are technocratic reforms which the elections department of Malaysia say, okay, since you protest so much of you, we're going to give that to you, right? But in Cambodia, where it was an opposition party that led the charge for election reform. And in that election, basically, it was the opposition leader who managed to pressure Hun Sen enough in order to do a deal with Hun Sen. And basically, at the time, Hun Sen said, like, what do you want? And then the opposition party leader, Sam Wei-ji, said, okay, I want half of the people on the election commission to be opposition people, right? And then half is Hun Sen people. That's fine, right? And so Hun Sen agreed to that. But it didn't actually fix the problems of the Cambodian electoral system with the voter rolls, so on and so forth. Right, so you have a different kind of reforms. But no matter what kind of reforms that you front, right, you really need like that mass mobilization to connect to people to say that this is really wrong, right? And it's really very difficult to have any kind of reform if the masses are not angry. And so the point is that different types of who leads the organization will need to do kind of different outcomes.
Sorry, I was thinking about after to get the question. I was thinking also about like just some simple reforms whereby you have boundaryless seats whereby an incumbent party cannot contest it. For example, mandates that you have 3 or 4 seats that you'll be a full-time MP, right? But you only non-incumbents can contest. And I think then we would really think seriously about whether or not we need the NCMP scheme or not, right? And it's a lot more legitimate if you have no boundary seats contested by political candidates, and that's just one of my suggestions. And another thing I was thinking about also is about online voting, right? Voter secrecy, overseas voters. How can we get more of them? I know I sound like a alarm clock, but blockchain works for these guys. Yeah. We have this thing called zero knowledge proofs, where you use your SingPass, you log into the system, you are given a token. So how many voters from this area is what? Then it can be open source on the blockchain, right? So people can verify that a vote has been cast, but not necessarily who cast it, right? And it's possible, so that if you're overseas, you can just log into your SingPass and vote. This is one of the things that I think only SM's son is able to implement. So unfortunately, it will never happen.
All right, thank you very much for that answer. Okay, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for the Q&A. If you would like to ask them questions, just catch them after this if they don't run away. All right, so thank you very much, everyone. Ask Malaka to speak. Iris.
Thank you for the wonderful conversation, for the panelists. Let's give another round of applause. Nyai, our wonderful moderator who does look slightly stressed. Thank you. Done a wonderful job moderating. And before we move on, I've been asked to engage in a little bit of emotional blackmail. So allow me a few minutes. Just kidding. Not emotional blackmail, but thank you for coming to this panel, for listening to this conversation. And as you can see, this is a pretty swanky location, so it's kind of expensive. Now, if you'd like to support us to put on more events like this, to host more conversations like this in the future, feel free to scan the QR code at the top of the screen and consider donating. If you can't, maybe you can take a picture of it and send it to other people so they can donate. If not, it's all right. Your presence alone is a wonderful day for us, and we're so happy you're here. Well, on behalf of all of us here at the event organizing team, we'd like to thank Jeremy, Joe Teo, Jeremy Tan, and Yon for their time today. Thank you.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye to our panelists and our moderator. Thank you so much. Dr. Chi, please stay on stage. Let's invite and let's welcome Dr. Chi to is our closing address.
On the 15th of April, Mr. Lawrence Wong dissolved Parliament and called for the general elections. On that very same day, the SGP issue is stained. In it, we said that Mr. Wong was resorting to the PAP's all but favorite playbook, and that was to engage in a smash and grab GE, which is to say that the PAP has always given this very short lead time in the hopes that it can quickly get the elections over and done with, giving the opposition a very limited time to stage a meaningful campaign. And then they'll be back to business as usual. And then we'll ask what has changed. So here we are. 3 months after the GE, and it's business as usual. My question is that what has changed? Before the elections, nearly 50% of Singaporeans said that they could never hope for financial freedom. After the elections, 60% Singaporean workers said that they were living from paycheck to paycheck. Is this an indication of a people's will as far as the results of the elections are concerned? And then there is some of these issues. Shanmuga's sale of his $88 million GCB, the Rideout Road saga, Keppel Corp scandal with 6 of its executives were just given stern warnings. And then there are the existential threats of overcrowding, mental health crisis, the widening inequality, the escalating prices of RHDB flats. Then there's also the dependence on foreign capital, the dangers of us being a rentier, rent-seeking economy, of being a tax haven and money laundering center. All these issues remained unaddressed and hardly debated during the GU. And then Lawrence Wall comes up and says that the people has given the PAP the another 5-year mandate to govern. Again, my question is that elections results, are they a true reflection of Singaporeans' worries and aspirations? I'd be very careful to draw that analogy or at least that comparison in showing that the majority of Singaporeans feel very comfortable with the electoral system in Singapore. Because if you were to ask North Koreans whether they're very happy with what they're living with, I can almost guarantee over 100% of them they say they would. I've lived long enough and I've written much enough about it to know that reform never starts with the masses. Whether it's a reform in Taiwan, South Korea, in apartheid South Africa, it always starts with a minority who think more, who know, and who have the courage to come up and contact C first. Habeas corpus, the separation between powers of the judiciary, executive, legislature, interracial marriage never started with the masses. And this is what I want to get at in today's remarks. Is the election results a true reflection of Singaporeans' words and aspirations? Or is the electoral system here so thoroughly and abjectly compromised that it produces not a contest of ideas, but just a mechanical, automatic legitimization of the PAP's rule? Now, I won't relitigate the issues that our panelists have brought up, except just to thank them for their erudition. And I just want to also have a shout out to the organizers. I think that you all know Aravind, and there is also Karthik Sundar for very ably bringing this back to tradition. That generation, many young Democrats and not so young Democrats who work today behind the scenes as a comms team for so expertly shepherding this event into what we see today. I hope you don't mind if you join me for another round. Well, now I want to turn the attention on you and those of you who might be watching this online. And I just want to get away for a minute
from just talking about the election system itself, and just to talk about the political ecosystem as a whole. And by that, I mean including the media and the continued desecration of our constitutional rights to freedoms of speech and peaceful assembly, and, as mentioned, the manipulation of our election system. All this engineered to produce one outcome, and one outcome only, which is to allow the PAP to rule in perpetuity. As long as the elections department works from within the Prime Minister's office and PAP continues to wield its anti-democratic power, no amount of campaigning done by the opposition will result in any meaningful and democratic change. And this is why you organize this forum, to light a spark of reform. We will challenge the stranglehold on our media. We will build a grassroots movement of courage and conviction, and we will prepare to challenge for democracy in our courts. At the same time, we will strengthen the SDP as a constructive platform, sharpening our policies and building the capacity to lead with integrity and vision towards the next elections. But hear me, my friends. Hear me with not just your ears, but with all your heart. Reform cannot be achieved without you. The enormity of this task before us demands your courage, your voice, and your active involvement. Until this day, I challenge you to join the solemn and noble undertaking. Don't look to the person next to you. Don't look to your friends for assurance. Instead, look into your heart and ask yourself this. If I don't step forward, then who will? If I don't begin today, then will there ever be a tomorrow? So don't walk away this afternoon without signing up with us. Our members, the Young Democrats, are on standby to welcome you, and as soon as possible, feasible to assign you to a task. Let us begin the work of building a freer, fairer, and democratic Singapore together today. Every time you stand your ground, even when your knees are trembling, someone notices. Every time you speak up when it's easier to be silent, someone finds their voice. Every time you push through injustice and disillusion, someone finds that feels less alone. And how do I know this? Because I was that someone who noticed, who found this voice, who felt less alone when I witnessed the courage of those who came before. Socrates once told us that a life unexamined is a life not worth living. May I be so bold as to add that a life without meaning, without hope, without agency is a life not worth living. Stand up. Stand up for Singapore. Stand up for your future, your children's future. Most of all, stand up for yourself. Singapore needs more than just parades, patriotic songs, and grandiose National Day rallies. It needs soul. It needs belongingness. It needs compassion. It needs freedom. It needs reform. Thank you.
Well, I found that personally very inspiring. I hope you did too. And I hope this entire past 2 hours has been educational, informative, and you feel like you've been challenged to do something. If you haven't, go talk to your friends, have a conversation with the people you came here with or the people you met here. And yeah, think harder. Well, this concludes our event for today. Again, if you're interested in finding out more, you can always scan the QR code, like I said a million times in the past 2 hours, to keep up to date with all the going ons with SDP, or even join us spot your time. Dr. Chi, in fact, will be doing a bit of book signing right outside. So, you can stay back and, peruse the books on offer if you're interested, cycle light up to get your book signed. But yeah, that concludes our event for today. Thank you all for coming.